he is atoned for and therefore can wear a headpiece that says holy to the Lord. And so now every Christian, everyone who believes in Jesus, goes before the Lord as one who bears on their head this news, holy to the Lord. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Renewal Bible in a Year podcast. My name is Pastor PJ Arsvold, and I am thrilled this week to be joining you once again as we dive into the scriptures and try to get a little bit of an understanding of what is all happening here. Just a brief recap. Last week, we read the beginning of the book of Exodus, and we read the Exodus account, the story of God calling Moses to lead his people out. He sent these plagues on Egypt and eventually helped the people cross the Red Sea. They just got out of Egypt, out of slavery, and then they are in the wilderness on their way towards the Promised Land. So today we're picking up in chapter 16 then, and if you recall, we had just finished this little story where the people were thirsty. We're only a couple days out of Egypt, but they're thirsting water. They can't find any. They do come across some water. It's too bitter to drink, so they grumble against the Lord. He shows Moses this log. Moses throws the log into the water. Then the water becomes drinkable, it becomes sweeter. And he kind of says, hey, here's how it's going to go. You got to listen to me, you got to trust me, and things are going to go all right. It's kind of this test for the people. Immediately we see that they still are struggling because in chapter 16, you have them going out. We're about a month to a month and a half out of Egypt at this point, and the people are getting hungry. And they start to complain. And it's funny how they articulate it because they start to say stuff like, oh, would we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, right? It would have been better had we just died back there because we're so hungry. And they have this crazy reminiscing where they say, back then we sat by meat pots and ate bread to the full, right? So they are imagining their former life in Egypt, so picturesque. And it's funny how rose-tinted their glasses are because, again, the whole book of Exodus starts off with the people being enslaved and them crying out to the Lord, do something about this. He does all of these wonders for them. He leads them out. He gives them freedom and safety. And now they're hungry. And I'm not trying to discount hunger, but all of a sudden they're ready to abandon it all. And they're saying how great things were. And I think that's a pretty natural human tendency is to reflect back on things more fondly than they were. It's really easy to look back and say, oh, remember how good things were compared to what they are now. And often much of life is a mixed bag, past, present, future. But yeah, that's what they're doing here. So they're grumbling. They have a false picture of what had happened. But the Lord tells them that he's going to take care of them. And so he says, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. Then on the sixth day, you're going to take a double portion. So on the seventh day, you don't take any. So here we have the pattern of Sabbath being set up. So if you recall in Genesis chapter 1 and to 2, God created everything in 6 days. Then on the seventh day, he rested. He is now instituting that as a pattern for the people. And we're going to see that in this week's readings, where there is work for 6 days, but then the seventh day is for rest. It is for refreshing. It is for time with God. It is for remembering his deeds and his past. And so what he says is, I'm going to send bread and you're going to gather for 6 days, but on the sixth day every week, you're going to gather double because then on the seventh day, you're not going to gather any. There's going to be no bread. Now, he also gives them some meat. So he gives them some quail bird to eat. And then you have this thing called manna. And it's really fascinating because it covers like a dew. So if you can imagine dew forming on the ground in the morning when the air is cool and such. And then when the dew evaporates, you have this bread that's left, this little flaky bread. And we're told a few things about it, but not a lot. But the people are so confused what it is that they ask, like, what is this? And the word manna sounds like the Hebrew word for kind of what is it? And the people, it says, no matter how much they gather, they never have lack and they never have extra. They kind of always have the right amount. So just as a foreshadowing of Jesus' ministry, when Jesus talks to us about praying in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, right? He is reminding us to pray for the food, the things that I need for this life today, right? So the people, if they try to gather up more than they need, let's say God has told them, I'm going to give you bread every single day. But let's say you're an Israelite and you're like, I don't know, I kind of want some extra just in case tomorrow's doesn't come or I just feel better. I'd rest assured knowing that I already have some in my tent and I don't have to rely on God giving some tomorrow. Well, then what happens is we see that worms grow in it. It's an act of disobedience because they tried to hold some over to the next day. And so it stinks, it smells bad. You only take how much you're supposed to take for that day, what you need for that day. And God's going to continue to provide this every day. Now, interestingly, right, we're told on the 6th day you gather a double portion because on the 7th day you shouldn't be gathering any. And what you see is this interesting thing where if you gather on the 6th day, 2 days worth, when you wake up on the Sabbath, there aren't worms growing in it. So notice that if you try to save some extra on a day you're not supposed to, worms grow. If you save extra on the day you're supposed to save extra, as an act of faith, no worms grow. So kind of a cool way that God is showing them, hey, we're doing this my way. I will take care of you. And if you listen to me, it's all going to go well. And then there's a couple other things about the manna. The first off is that we're told that it tastes like these little cakes made with honey. And I think that's beautiful because if you remember back in Exodus 3, Moses was told that God was going to lead them to a land flowing with milk and honey. And that's going to be a descriptor of this promised land of Canaan that they're going to multiple times going forward, even in this week's readings, right? It's flowing with milk and honey. It's abundant, it's rich, it's sweet. And I think it's interesting that on the journey there, they're getting a little tiny foretaste. You're going to taste a little honey every day to remind you that you're going somewhere that's flowing with honey. And I think if you are a Christian, I think one of the things that I tend to think about is we know that when Jesus returns, that everything's going to be so good. It's going to be like a giant party. There's going to be a feast. There's going to be no more sin, no more death, no more weeping. And in this lifetime, we get a little foretaste. We get things like communion, which is a foretaste of that feast to come. Not coincidentally, it's also bread. We get things like just God's blessing, his forgiveness. We experience God's presence when we hear his word, when we pray. And those are all little bits of foretaste of the final thing that's coming. Now, we believe that believing in Jesus, we're kind of already in the promised land. We're already part of his kingdom. And yet we're going to see the fullness when we get to that last day. So kind of cool that they're getting a little bit of a taste. More is to come. But for now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview. And then what God also tells them to do with the manna is he tells them to collect a jar with an omer, which is just a unit of measurement. And that's basically to be a testament or testimony going forward. So people in future generations can always look at this jar and remember that God provided for his people. It's kind of a testimony of God's provision in the past. Hey, look at this jar of manna. Yeah, God used to give us this when we were in the wilderness, and he took care of us. And much like the Sabbath, no worms grow in it. Every other manna that's collected in your house kept overnight is going to grow worms, but this jar, God preserves and protects. And so it's there to remind them. And we're told right now that this manna is something that they are going to eat up until they enter into the promised land. And we're going to see this when you get to the book of Joshua. We're told the last day that manna appears. It's the day before they enter the promised land. Because at that point, it's like, you've arrived. You don't need this anymore because the final fulfillment of what I was telling you about is here. So they have the manna for a time, and then they're going to get to the promised land. They won't need it anymore. And then we have our third grumbling story already in a row, where again, the people are thirsty. They're complaining. Moses is like, hey, they're going to like stone me. They're so mad at me, Lord. And so the Lord tells Moses to gather up the elders or to gather up some elders. So get some eyewitnesses. Now remember, they're traveling with over 1 million people. So not everyone can see all of these events, but he's gathering leaders from all the different tribes, all the different groups, so they can be eyewitnesses to what God is doing. And in the sight of these elders, he is instructed to strike a rock. And in striking it, water comes out from the rock. So in striking this rock, water bursts forth and the people can drink. And again, they're taken care of. So once again, you have people grumbling, and yet despite their grumblings, God continues to provide for them. Then you have this battle. So we're told all of a sudden that the people of Amalek come and fight them, and they do war with them. Supposedly they, again, are fearful, like, hey, these are new people that are coming into our territory. We heard what they did in Egypt, possibly. So they're fighting them, and they come out to attack the Israelites. And we're told that there's this war, this battle between the two of them. And you have this really interesting picture where Moses is up kind of looking on the battle, and he puts his arms in the air. And whenever his arms are up, the people of Israel are prevailing. Things are going well for them in battle. But whenever his arms get weary and they come down, then all of a sudden the tides flip and Amalek is winning the battle. And so you have this picture where eventually they kind of make a chair for Moses, and then Aaron and Hur hold his arms up. So he's too weary to hold his hands up by himself. But because of these companions, they're holding his arms up. Israel ultimately has victory. Now, a couple other things about this story. First off, we're told about Joshua, who's going to be a prominent figure later. So all of a sudden, Joshua pops up, and you're like, whoa, who is this guy? But he's going to be the one who's ultimately going to succeed Moses in leading the people into the promised land, as we'll see. So now all of a sudden, he's showing up. He's Moses' assistant at this point. There's going to be a few times where Moses brings Joshua with, gives him instructions, and so on. He assists him. And then also we're told that there's now a judgment against Amalek because they opposed God's forces. Again, unprovoked. Israel was not attacking Amalek. Amalek just attacked Israel. And so God pronounces a judgment. If you're going to attack my people, right, there's going to be a punishment for that. And so he says the memory of the people of Amalek will be blotted out throughout history. And so one of the things that we find out then in Exodus 18 is that Moses had sent his wife and sons back to his father-in-law, presumably to keep them safe from all the events that were taking place, to protect them. And so now Jethro is bringing Moses' wife and his sons to be reunited with him. And Moses recounts for Jethro all the things that the Lord did. And remarkably, Jethro says, wow, blessed be the Lord. I can see for all that he's done, there's no God like the Lord, right? Like Yahweh. So Jethro is praising the Lord for what he's done for Moses and for his people. And then while Jethro is there, Moses has to go back to work, kind of. And so Moses is there judging the people. So people bring cases. Hey, my brother and I are fighting over this thing. Hey, what should I do? What does the Lord want me to do? And Moses is the single person kind of facilitating all of this. Again, for people of over 1 million. So he's basically just spends all day and all night just, from sun up to sundown, just doing this, judging people, bringing their cases before the Lord. And then Jethro gives them this really good wisdom of kind of trustworthy delegation. He says, this is insane. This is not good. You need to find some leaders who are not going to take a bribe, who fear the Lord, who are good and righteous, and they'll handle most of the cases. And then if there's a big enough case, then sure, they can bring it to you. That's fine, but you need to delegate a little bit. And so you have this kind of delegation going on. But I will just say, this harkens back to that passage earlier in Exodus chapter 2, when Moses starts to break up a fight between two Israelites, and they say, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Well, here we are, Exodus 18, and Moses is quite literally judging the cases for all the people, trying to break up disputes and such. So again, some good irony there. They didn't know the Lord has made this man a judge over us. And then as we get to chapter 19, we get to a very significant place. We get to Sinai, and we get to this mountain in Sinai. And Sinai is going to be this landmark spot where God's going to encounter his people. He's going to give them the law, primarily the 10 Commandments, but as we'll see, other laws and statutes as well. And it becomes an embodiment in the New Testament for the law as a whole. Mount Sinai is almost a stand-in, just like Moses will kind of be a stand-in for the law at times when God is talking or when the New Testament authors are speaking. So Sinai, a very significant moment here. And so we get to this mountain, and then the Lord tells the people how you've seen what I've done, how I've borne you up on eagle's wings, and I brought you to myself, right? I rescued you from your oppressor, and I've brought you here to be with me. And now if you indeed will obey my voice and keep my covenant, so keep this agreement, this relationship, these promises, these commands, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And so you have God telling these people, you've seen what I've done, right? How I brought you here, how I rescued you. Great. If we can you can listen to me, we can keep this going. You're a treasured possession to me, right? You're my people. And I'm going to make you a kingdom of priests and this holy nation in this world, right? This embodiment of how people should be. And so you see this kind of relationship taking place with God and his people as he's saying this. And then you have God appearing in this thick cloud. And so again, you think back to burning bush. You think back to pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, leading the people through the Red Sea and so on. And so God's presence, again, embodied by this fire and cloud and smoke and all of that kind of comes with it, is kind of this picture of God's presence, God's location, you could say. And then the Lord tells Moses to consecrate the people. So consecrate means to set apart, to make something holy. So you're using it for a special purpose. And so when people are consecrated, they usually go through some sort of washing or purifying or something that is making them presentable, that is making them holy. And so God says to Moses, I'm going to encounter this people, but you need to consecrate them first, right, to stand in my presence. So we'll get into later about ritual cleanliness and purity and stuff, but there's a certain sense of go through the right things to make yourself presentable to God. And then he tells the people not to touch the mountain because the Lord will break out and they will die. So again, God's presence, he's this, as we're going to see, this all-consuming fire, this picture of holiness and goodness. And wickedness and evil really doesn't belong in his presence. Now, remarkably, this is a story where God is making himself very present with a very sinful people. And yet at the same time, we see that you need to listen to God's command because his just presence itself is consuming. It is so holy, and sin and disobedience and wrongdoing doesn't belong in his presence. And so they need to be purified and listen to him. So don't touch the mountain or else you might die. And then we have this thunder and lightning and a trumpet, and the people are trembling. They're scared just by the sight and the sounds of it all. And then Moses goes up on the mountain to meet with God. And so God calls Moses to come up to him while the people remain at the base of the mountain. And then as we get into chapter 20, we get a very landmark passage where we have the giving of what are called the 10 Commandments, or in Hebrew, quite literally the 10 words. And these are really important. They're called out here in the Old Testament. They are a good summary statement of these kind of core laws that God is giving his people, these core things to follow, to obey. And the Lord starts off with this first statement about who he is. He says, I am the Lord your God, right? So he's saying his personal name there. So I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So before he gives any quote unquote rules or laws, he's establishing this relationship on the fact that I'm the one who freed you from slavery. You're free today because of what I've done. Therefore, here's what I'm asking you to do. So again, notice how the Lord is always the one who acts first. He doesn't wait for the people to be obedient. He doesn't wait for the people to follow all the rules before he comes to them, before he helps. He helped this people when they were in Egypt. Now he's asking them, I've saved you, I've rescued you, live accordingly. So as Christians then, one of the ways to think about this is when we think about living our lives according to God's will, right? It is not that I myself can do any works or be obedient enough to earn God's favor and God's love. Rather, the order of operations is flipped. God comes to us when we are sinful, when we are broken, when we are disobedient, and he gave his son Jesus while we were still sinners, so that believing in him, we might be forgiven and cleansed or consecrated, now to obey his rules and obey his laws. Not because they save us, not because they establish this covenant relationship with God. God established it based on his own love and his goodness in sending his son Jesus. In receiving that in faith, then we live lives that reflect it, obeying God's laws for the care of the other. And so here you have these 10 words or these 10 commandments that kind of flesh out what that looks like. And again, we're going to have lots of laws in the Old Testament, but these are a critical 10 that are going to get repeated again later in the Old Testament, and again, kind of stand as a landmark summary picture of God's law. And so we start off with, you shall have no other gods before me. And the word before there is used in the sense of to stand before somebody, right? To be in their presence, to be in front of them. And so the Lord's saying, I am your God. I'm the one who rescued you. There's no place in my presence for any other gods. It's not me plus your other gods. Now, here he's first and foremost referring to other gods, other deities, other idols, so little statues, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think more importantly and more all-encompassingly, there's nothing else in our lives in God's presence that should capture our heart like God does. He should be everything, and then from that flows everything else. So in his presence, no other things for us to worship or bow down to or give our everything to. The Lord is alone. He's the one. Then we have this command not to make a carved image or the likeness of anything. So this is a prohibition against, again, making a figurine of an animal or a person or an angel or a picture that you're going to worship. So one of the common practices in other religions in this area was to have like a statue of a deity and to view that statue itself as the deity or an extension of it, and that you would worship it as such. You might remember when Jacob was running away from Laban, how Jacob's wife Rachel stole Laban's household god or his household idol. That would be an example of this. He had a little figurine that he worshiped, that he believed was his god. And the Lord says, you should not do that. I am the one Lord, so don't make any other figurines. Don't make anything else that you should worship or bow down to. And he says, I am a jealous God. And jealous not in like a petty high school drama jealousy, but rather the Lord is giving everything to this people, and he gives everything to his people. And he doesn't want his people then to give everything to something else, because A, nothing else deserves that. But more importantly, B, it's for their own good. The Lord is the only one that you can worship that isn't going to consume you, that's not going to take, but rather give. And so he wants to establish this. Don't be making these idols. Don't be making these little figurines or images that you're going to worship. None of that. Just worship me. Again, I'm the only one. And that idol one is really an extension of the first one, having no other gods before me. And that is played out in the fact that you should not have any physical idols or images, so don't worship them. Then you have not taking the Lord's name in vain. I talked about this briefly on the last episode, and using the Lord's name and how there was such revere for his name, which there should be, that the people didn't even want to speak it, which is why you have the Lord instead of Yahweh ends up taking over as the way that people speak and the way that people read the scriptures. But this idea that you don't use this name in vain. His name should carry weight. We should not use it lightly. We shouldn't throw it away willy-nilly or in using lies. We should not swear by his name falsely. We should not use his name vainly. Then you have the remember the Sabbath day. So again, now we have this Sabbath day being established, and this idea that he grounds it in the fact that when he made the heavens and the earth, he worked for 6 days and then rested. And he says, you shouldn't be working. Your animals shouldn't be working. If you have any servants, they shouldn't be working, right? Everyone should rest. This should be a holy day. It should be treated as holy and reverently. Then you have this command to honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord is giving to you. So honor your parents. That's a foundational command in the 10 Commandments of honor your parents, that these are people who God gave you. You don't pick your parents. God does. And you are to honor them and respect them as authorities that God has put over you. And there's also this promise that if you do so, things are going to go well for you, right? Parents often have lived more life. They have more wisdom. They're not perfect. They're fallible. And yet God has given them to us, and we should honor and treat them with the utmost respect. And you have a few more. You shall not murder, so to kill wrongfully. You shall not commit adultery, so to break marital relationships. You should instead honor your marriage or honor your not marriage or someone else's marriage, right? To live holy in our sexual lives. You shall not steal, so don't take what belongs to others. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So first and foremost, this is a legal term. This is the idea that if you get called as a witness to something, there's a dispute and somebody says, I call you to the stand, or can you come and testify what you saw? Don't lie. Don't lie about what you saw or didn't see. Don't perpetuate injustice or wrong by lying. But then more broadly, it comes down to other things like slander. How are you speaking about others? What are you saying? Are you lying with your words? So generally speak truthfully and righteously about others. And then finally, we have you shall not covet your neighbor's house. So don't look at your neighbor's house and kind of his life and his situation and covet that and desire that. But then also don't covet your neighbor's wife or his servants or his animals or anything that's your neighbor's. So you kind of have don't covet your neighbor's life and possessions, then don't covet your neighbor's relationships, and then just don't covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. And coveting is really this idea of looking at what somebody else has and saying like, I want that, right? And I'm stewing on it, I'm thinking about it, and it'd be really nice. And so we see this command really cuts to the heart of things too. It's not just don't take it from your neighbor, but don't even sit there and be greedy for it. Don't even sit there and envy it, because it's bad for you and it's ultimately not how we're supposed to treat one another. And as you look at the 10 Commandments, you have often when they're broken into these 2 tablets, you have the first commands that deal with our relationship with God, right? You shall have no other gods before me. Don't make any other images or idols. You shall not use my name in vain. And you shall remember the Sabbath day. And then you have these second table, which are referring to our relationship with other people. starting with honoring your parents, moving into things like not murdering, not stealing, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all connected to everything, right? Because a sin against my neighbor is also a sin against God, but you can kind of see that kind of flow, that they kind of start with loving and honoring God. And then from that, it's going to change how we speak about God, how we spend our time towards God, and then how we treat others. And then as the people see all this, so Moses has been up on the mountain, the people see all this and they're terrified. So they basically tell Moses, you know what, we don't want to talk to God. It's too terrifying. We don't want to die. So how about you speak to him and then you speak to us. We'll take you as the messenger from him. And then you have some laws about altars and this idea that when you make an altar, you don't want to profane it. You don't want to defile it by carving into it. So it should be kind of unhewn stone, right? So just kind of massive rocks. If you're going to just build an altar somewhere, don't carve it. Just take it out of the whatever rocks you can find. You could think of it as rocks that God has already sculpted in the world somewhere else. And then rules about like not walking up to it on steps, because if you think about it this time, everyone's wearing what looks like a robe to us. And so you're going to kind of flash the altar if you're walking up steps in that kind of outfit. So don't put an altar with steps because you're disrespecting God by approaching it and possibly flashing it. And then as we move into chapter 21, I want to take a moment to talk about two things broadly. First off is Old Testament laws in general. And then I want to talk about slavery. So two big topics. So first, I want to talk about Old Testament laws. As we move forward, we're going to get into a lot more of these laws. We just saw a little bit with the 10 Commandments and obviously laws about altars. We're now going to get into a section that deals with a ton of laws that God is giving his people. And as we go forward, later in Exodus, but especially in like books like Leviticus, which is coming up next, you're going to see more laws given to God's people about how they're to live, how they're to interact, how they're to worship. And this is one of those sections that I think a lot of people struggle with because the accusation is often made that people who believe in the scriptures, believe in the Bible, like Christians, cherry pick laws. They cherry pick rules in the Bible. So we're not going to read these today, but why do you listen to some laws about marriage, but you don't listen to some laws about mixing fabrics together, as we'll see later in Leviticus? And it's a good question. And for now, as we go through the Bible, I just want to give us a couple categories to consider. I'm not going to resolve everything, but if you have questions about specific laws, I'm happy to get into them. But a couple things to consider. First off, often people have looked at the Old Testament laws and kind of categorize them as three kind of big buckets. Often what's called the moral laws, which are fundamental, how human beings are to treat other people, how human beings are to treat themselves, treat God. And then you also have what are called the ceremonial, dealing with worship and sacrifice, and then the civil, dealing with regular life. How do you carry out justice? How do you resolve disputes? How do you repay somebody if you've hurt their animal? That kind of stuff. And the reason why people have found those categories helpful is what you see at this point in human history with God's people, Israel at this time, is you have what is a theocracy. So today we think of, I'm recording this, I'm in Denver, Colorado. So I have city laws in Denver, I have state laws in Colorado, and I have federal laws in the United States of America that are all civil. Those laws tell me how much to pay taxes for, where I can and can't drive and park. They tell me what I can and can't do to other people and the other people's property. But then I also have religious laws, right? So I have what God has commanded and what he wants for my life. And we think of those kind of as two different spheres. But you have to remember that at this point, it's all one thing. God is their king. He's their God. He's kind of everything. And so God is giving out laws on how to handle mundane offenses against people. He's also giving out rules about how you worship him. And he's also giving out rules about not murdering somebody. And so I think one of the challenges is trying to understand that this is a specific time and place where God is not only giving foundational moral laws, and he's not only giving religious rights, but he's giving everything. He's giving kind of a whole way of life for this people. As we go forward, and especially as we get into the New Testament, one good thing to think about when it comes to an Old Testament law is to ask the question, is this something that Jesus or other New Testament writers reinforce for us, they double down on, they re-articulate it, or is it something that Jesus fulfills and then says this no longer applies to us in the same way? that this was for a time and place. And again, if you have a question about a specific law that you're like, hey, this rule, what do we do with this? I'm happy to address that. As we go forward, I'm going to just highlight a few that I think are interesting and some that I think might be worth flagging, but I'm not going to get to all of them because it would take forever. But again, if I don't address something and you read it and you're like, what about this? I would love to get into that. And then, like I said, the second thing I wanted to get to before we go any further was the idea of slavery in the Bible and biblical times. But I'll start by saying this. The Hebrew words that we translate as slaves, in Hebrew, the word is eved, it's doulos in Greek. These words capture a variety of different relationships. So one could be like the people of Israel and Egypt, quite literally enslaved people. And eved could also refer to somebody who is what we call a servant or a bondservant. And how you get into this could be a variety of reasons. For instance, one of the things that we're going to see is that the act of kidnapping somebody in Israel and forcing them into slavery was punishable by death, both for the person who kidnapped and enslaved the person and for anybody who then takes ownership of that person. If you're found in ownership of somebody who is kidnapped into slavery like that, that is punishable by death. That's here in chapter 21, verse 16, I believe. And so when we hear slavery, we immediately think of, at least in the Western world, what we think of as North American, North Atlantic slave trade slavery, right? And I think one of the things to wrestle with is, what did these relationships look like? What was God doing with them? Because the reality is, we saw at the beginning of Exodus, is that slavery was a real reality in the world at this time. This is very commonplace for people to be enslaved. So God never tells people, start a system of slavery, but rather he creates rules about if you're going to have servants, bondservants, slaves in some way, shape, or form, there's some parameters to protect people, to protect even those servants and slaves. And I'll just invite you to read and to wrestle with it. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to expound on it. But it's one of those things that it's hard for us because it's such a different world than we're used to. And what we'll see is a lot of people, the reason why they entered into this relationship that in many Bibles is translated slave is because they financially were poor. They couldn't afford to eat, so they were going to starve to death. And so in order to avoid that, what they would do is they'd enter into this servitude where they'd agree to work with somebody for 6 years, and then on the 7th year, they'd be free. Basically, they're saying, I will come into your house, I will be a servant, I will take care, you can send me on tasks around your fields, whatever. And then after these number of years, you've taken me in, you've provided me food, then you have to let me go again. So in this case, there's actually a system so you don't just starve and die. There's another option. It's almost like a larger scale idea of like if you were to eat at a restaurant back in the day and then you couldn't pay your bill and you had to like work your bill, like you have to go into the kitchen and like do some dishes for a while to earn the food that you ate. It's basically like, hey, I can't afford to live right now. I can't afford to eat. Can I come work for you for a few years? You'll feed me, you'll house me, and I'll be your servant. I'll work for you. And then after a number of years, I'll go free. And so that's a little bit what it looks like often. You do see it sometimes as punishment. So if you take something from somebody and then you can't pay them back, well, now you have to serve them for a number of years. It's restitution, so to say. So again, I realize it's going to be something that's something for us to wrestle with. And we'll see that slavery is not meant to be an indefinite thing. It's not meant to go on forever. It's something that is for a time. And you have later this year of Jubilee where every 50 years, anyone who's been enslaved is set free. So again, a servant might enter the system for a 6-7 year period. Also, every 50 years, any servants can go free. But all of this is just to say that as we go forward, again, please bring your questions. Please bring your questions and challenges that you might be wrestling with. But again, this servanthood, this slavery, it looks different than what we think of. And what we'll see going forward is it's a picture and a metaphor that God uses to highlight our freedom that we have, just as God led the people out of slavery in Egypt. He's the one who sets the captives free. We're going to see that going forward too in Jesus. But for this time and place, God is creating parameters that in a world filled with slavery and servanthood and bondservanthood, whatever you want to call it, he's setting parameters to protect and watch out and kind of put framework around it to care for people and to make sure that it's not abused. A few other laws I'm just going to highlight in these next few chapters. So in chapter 21, in verse 22, we see that if you hit a pregnant woman and kill the child in her, that's a punishable offense because that's viewed as life, that's viewed as a person. And so you see kind of the value put on even an unborn child. You see this kind of refrain, a life for a life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. And so you see kind of at a foundational justice level, right? You're thinking of civil justice, trying to carry out what is fair. If somebody takes something, then they should get paid back in like manner. You take money from somebody, you should pay that money back. You hurt somebody, there's going to be a punishment of equal scale back. So it's not over abusive. So if somebody commits an offense, it's not throwing the book at them. But at the heart of these laws is this idea of justice and carrying out God's will for how we interact with one another. And it's even stuff that's kind of interesting, like the end of chapter 21, there's rules about if an ox goes and kills somebody, that ox needs to be put down. But if the owner of that ox knew that it had a tendency to attack people and he didn't take the proper precautions to stop something from happening, like caging it or putting it down, and then the animal goes and kills somebody, he's now liable for the murder of that person. So you see almost like a capital punishment for willful negligence would probably be the term that we'd use in legal world today. So again, it's really interesting to see the laws. And so God is setting up a society, he's setting up a world where you need to look out and care for other people. And there's times where something's going to happen. An animal goes rogue and goes crazy and attacks somebody. Put that animal down so it can't do it again. But if you have any reason to believe that your animal could hurt somebody, it has a tendency, and you are negligent and you allow that to happen, you basically have committed manslaughter of sorts because of your negligence. And so you see some of these laws kind of playing out in how people live and how they should take thought to think about how my actions, my animals, my everything affects other people. We see in chapter 22 kind of a self-defense law that if somebody breaks into your house and you defend your house, defend yourself, and you strike them down, that you're not guilty of murder in that case because you didn't know their intentions. Were they attacking you? It's dark, but if that person survives, they are ultimately still responsible for what they've stolen to pay it back. And we see that if they're unable to make reparations, then they kind of enter into this servitude that we talked earlier about. We see not only animals goring people and attacking people, but if you let your animal graze in somebody else's field and eat all of their crops, you need to pay back what those crops were. So again, just fairness. You're going to let your animals eat from their field, you need to pay that person back. Like you can't just take their property. You have fields of your own. Don't take from your neighbor like that. We also see some of these rituals that God institutes that if there's kind of a dispute, you see people called before the Lord to make oaths and promises, right? To kind of bear witness to what they did or didn't do. For instance, if you were watching over your neighbor's money or his property and then somebody stole it, right? One of the questions is, did somebody steal it from you or did you take it and you're just saying it was stolen? And so you'd go before the Lord and take an oath and the Lord would be the one to reveal what had happened. And so there's this idea too of there's things that only the Lord knows. And so we're going to take these to him and he's going to reveal them. Again, he doesn't promise to work that way today, but we do see at this time this idea of calling on the Lord and he actually reveals this is the guilty party. Another law that I want to highlight, simply because I find a lot of people wrestle with this one, and it doesn't make much sense to them, is in chapter 22, verse 16, where you have a law concerning a man who seduces a unmarried but marriageable aged woman and lies with her, sleeps with her, and then the law says that he has to now take her for a bride, take her for a wife, and pay the bride price to her father. Now, that can seem really disarming to us because for many of us, it seems crazy for a man who has seduced and taken this from a woman or convinced her to sleep with him to now she has to marry him, right? It feels like it's punishing her in some ways. I understand why this seems really difficult to us. And I would be lying if I said it's not something that I've wrestled with. Like, what is going on here? One of the things that's hard for us to understand in our world today, where men and women both work in the workforce and can make a living, we fail to realize that when your livelihood is so dependent upon agricultural pursuits and the ability to work long hours out in a field and all of these things, not everybody, but many people, that was their life. And husbands/fathers would have been the providers for the family. They're the protectors. They're the ones who provide for the family, bring food to the family, and wives and mothers help nurture and care for the household. And so if somebody were to seduce a woman, get her to sleep with him, now you have somebody this woman who, because she is no longer a virgin, would in this society be viewed as unmeritable, undesirable. Nobody would want to take her anymore. Now she's been consigned to a life where she will never have somebody to provide for her, to take care of her, to make her a wife and a mother. And so it was a really damning thing to do this to a woman. And so the law said, if you're going to take that from her, you're not just going to get to sleep with her. You only get to do that if you're going to make her your wife, right? That's what that's for. And so if you're going to do that to her, you can't then flee and run away and go somewhere else. You now have to give her the full commitment of marriage, of providing for her, of protecting her. You can't just take that from her. It's actually, as crazy as it might sound to some of us, it is actually one of the most loving things for that woman because it prevents her from being left out in the cold. It's saying nobody can take this from you without committing to you fully. And the only case that wouldn't happen is if her father said, no, basically, I will provide for her. I'm not going to let her go to this man for whatever reason. But then again, you have somebody making sure to take care of her. So it's in a society where a woman would be extremely vulnerable off on her own. It prevents her from finding herself in that situation because of this man's actions. Again, it might still sound crazy to some of us, but that's why, again, I want to just sit with the context. And if you have follow-up questions, please feel free to shoot them my way. You have more laws about no sorcery, no bestiality, sleeping with animals. Again, no idolatry, so don't worship anything else. All of these things have no place in God's world. That's what he's saying. No place in my society, no place in my people. You shouldn't be contacting other spirits or trying to cast any sort of magic spells. You shouldn't be violating what sexuality is with animals, and you shouldn't be worshiping false gods. I'm the one true God. Do it my way. And then you have this command not to wrong sojourners. So these would be people who would be traveling around. Again, they're temporary in a place. They're not from that place. They're kind of passing through. You can think of sojourners a little bit like resident aliens, and that they're foreigners who are dwelling in a place. They're kind of like people who have gone through and immigrated to a new place. Now, the hard part with what we think about immigration and such today is that at this time, there isn't the same idea of a nation state with a central government and distinct borders. So it's easier and more common for people just to kind of migrate and move. But you see this emphasis that you should not wrong these sojourners. If there's somebody from another land living amongst you, you don't take advantage of them. You don't oppress them. And God says you were sojourners. You didn't have a home. You were slaves at one point. You were foreigners, and I cared for you. So please don't oppress the sojourners amongst you. And then really interesting, in chapter 22, verse 25, we have these laws about financial care for one another. So the Bible talks a ton about money, and here we have even laws around it. So first off, we see that you should not charge your brother interest. You know, it's such commonplace to talk about loan interest and mortgages and savings account returns and stuff like that. And we often take for granted that in the Old Testament, now again, there's processes to talk about whether or not this applies to us today. But we see this clear command in the Old Testament not to charge one another interest. Because if somebody needs money, if they are desperate for money, they can't afford to feed themselves, they can't afford to clothe themselves, that is not an opportunity for you to profit off of them. If they need money, you can loan it to them, but then they pay you back how much they took. You don't use that as an opportunity to extract more from them. And you just look at the damage that interest does to so many people who get into extreme debt because of interest rates or because they take out loans they shouldn't, and then they have not only the principal to pay off, but all this interest. And again, it's a whole conversation we could have, but at least in God's society and the people of Israel at this time, he says, no interest from one another. You don't do that. And then he goes so far to say, if you take a pledge, so we think of like putting down some sort of collateral. If somebody says, hey, I need to borrow some money so I can go get something, as a pledge, here, hold on to my cloak for a little bit. And that way, that's kind of like a promise that I'm going to come back and pay you back. God even says, don't hang on to that cloak overnight, right? If your brother is that desperate that they need some money, don't hold on to their cloak because they probably need that to sleep. Like, how are they supposed to stay warm? And so you see this extreme care for those who are poor, those who have very little, and not to ever take advantage of them, but to look out for those who are needful, who are fatherless. Again, because fatherless or widowed meant you were lacking that father or husband that was so often the provider for your household. And so there's this huge care given to looking out for them and to emphasizing to God's people, you need to care for them. In chapter 23, we have this reinforcement of not giving false witness, not lying about testimonies about what happened. And then also you have these rules about Sabbath year. So the idea that you can till the ground for 6 years. If you know anything about farming, you work the ground, you plant crops. But then on the 7th year, you let it lie fallow. You don't plant anything, you don't work it up. You just let it grow as it would naturally grow. You're giving the land a rest. So notice this. So there's the weekly rhythm where you, your household, your creatures, your animals, they all take a rest. You all take a rest once a week. And now even your field gets to rest once every 7 years. You're not constantly maximizing everything. You're not constantly trying to overwork everything. And then he goes on to talk about the Sabbath week. And then he talks about all of these festivals. And we're going to get even more later, but there's kind of these 3 big festivals. So here he lists them as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that's the Passover one, if you think back to when they were leaving Exodus. So you do that every single year to remember the Passover, to remember God's deliverance out of Egypt. There's also the Feast of the First Fruits. So when you get the first harvest of the year, when your first crops are coming in, there would be a festival to bring some of the first fruit of the year as a sacrifice to God, saying, wow, you've already started to provide for us. You're going to provide more for us. So before we get to the rest, here's the first part back. It's an act of trust towards God. It's an act of asking his favor on the rest of harvest. And so it's this kind of rhythmic part of their life to remind them, hey, everything you get, everything your field produces is a gift from God. So come and bring the first part back. And then you have the Feast of the Ingathering, which is at the end of harvest. You've now gathered the rest of it, offer a sacrifice, thanking God for the harvest that was. So you see these festivals, and again, we'll look at more, but it's kind of this beautiful rhythm of God reinforcing these truths. And he's giving people a chance to celebrate, to have a feast and a festival, to remember God brought us out of Egypt. He's the one who's giving us this crops, and now he's the one who gave us this harvest again this year. And so you're going through this cycle of remembering what God has done and continues to do. And then you have this promise of the conquest. So this promise that, hey, I'm going to bring you to this promised land, and I'm going to drive out those people and make way for you because of their sin, because of their wickedness. This calls back to Genesis when God told Abraham that at that point, the sins of the Amorites had not yet been complete, that they were still sinning, but God was giving them time. Well, now he's saying, I'm judging them. They're going to be spit out of this land, and I'm going to make way for you. But he tells them, I'm going to drive them out slowly. So that way it doesn't get infested by beasts or overrun. So it's not going to be a quick process. Good reminder for us that when we're asking for God's intervention, it doesn't always happen in a snap of a finger. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes God intentionally does it in a process, right? Slowly, however that may be. And then in chapter 24, having heard all this, the people agree to this. They say, yep, sounds good. We'll do it, which is great. They agree to obey these words. Moses builds an altar with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel, and there offers the sacrifice. We see that Moses reads the law. He reads this covenant, this promise. The people then say, yes, we'll do this. And then Moses takes the blood from the sacrifice and he sprinkles it on them. He throws it on the people. And so you see blood as this important sign and this important symbol of this covenant, this promise. And this is part of what Jesus is referring to in the Last Supper when he says, this cup is my blood of the new covenant or testament, depending how you translate that word. But regardless, it's saying there was a first covenant and now there's a new covenant that Jesus has instituted, and my blood is the new blood that's for it. The people in Exodus 24, blood was sprinkled on them as a sign of the covenant. Now people receive Jesus' blood as the covenant now. Then you have Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 elders going up, and they behold God. So they actually see God in his glory in some way, shape, or form. And then Moses goes up on the mountain by himself for 40 days and 40 nights where he talks with God. And then you have these instructions in chapter 25 about the sanctuary and what's called the tabernacle, which means tent. So you have all of these instructions that God is giving. Now you think about ceremonial. This is how you're to worship me. This is the space that you are to create to worship me. And we get very specific details about what that is to look like. God takes careful attention to create this space for the people. So we see first this Ark of the Covenant, which is a really important feature. This is going to be the place in which God sits on. His presence sits on when he's with the people. When they want to come before him, he's on this ark. And so it's this ark of wood. It has these poles that you carry it by. So it's always supposed to be carried by pole. And you have these two cherubim on either side that kind of cover it. And I'll include a link to maybe some renderings of what all of this stuff looks like. But what you see here is this seat in which God's presence is, and you have these two angels on either side of it. And flash forward, when you have Jesus rising in the Gospels and you have two angels sitting on either side of where he was laying in the tomb, this is the imagery that that's picking up on. This is what it's trying to capture, that where Jesus was, this is God's presence here on earth. You have a table where you have this bread of presence. You're always supposed to have this bread before God, and this bread then is something that's only to be eaten by the priests. You have a golden lampstand, so you have these kind of 7 lamps, kind of a center one, 3 on either side. And again, light, fire, all symbols of God's presence, that this lamp is here to remind them that God is here, God is present in this place. And then the tabernacle, which is the word that means tent or booth. And so you have this tent that is designed, and it's blues and purples, and it's got cherubim sewn into it, and it's got all of this kind of imagery. It's this kind of beautiful, ornate tent that they're going to carry with them as they go through the wilderness. So they're going to carry this tent, set up all these different rooms and stuff as their place of worship, their place of sacrifices, their place of their relationship with God kind of being centered around. Then you have the altar for this place. So you have this bronze altar with these kind of 4 horns on the corners. And again, this is where the sacrifices will take place. You have the court. So there's an outer court as well. And then you have the inner places. So you have the holy place and then the Holy of Holies. So that's where the Ark of the Covenant is going to go. So if you imagine this kind of big tent situation, and then you have a smaller tent situation, and then in the inside, you have the small room in the very inside. And that is the location that when God is going to be present with his people, that's like the place you go to, is the Holy of Holies. In the Gospels, we're going to see this kind of imagery referred to in the book of Hebrews. But again, you kind of have this whole beautiful tent with its different sacrificial elements and these different ornate things that carry their different meanings. And then you have the center place called the Holy of Holies with this Ark of the Covenant, which is where God sits with his people. And then we're told that there's oil in the lamps and it goes on forever. So again, God is with his people all the time. So just like God is always with them, you always have a lamp burning to remind you God is here. And then we have instructions about priests' garments. So here we're told that Aaron and his sons are going to be the priests. Just as a little bit of a preview, the Levites, or the tribe of Levi, the descendants of Levi, are going to be the temple workers. They're in charge of temple care and temple work. But within that, not only do you have this tribe, but within that you have one family line, the family line from Aaron, who is going to be in charge of being priest in this place. They're going to be the high priest and the other priests who offer the sacrifices themselves. So Levites have a special role, but the sons of Aaron, the descendants of Aaron, are very particularly the priests in this place. And so you have these beautiful garments that they're to wear. So the high priest, we're told, has this ephod and these shoulder pieces and this kind of gown. And he has these 2 stones on his shoulders made of onyx, and each one has 6 names of the sons of Israel. So when he goes before and ministers to the Lord, he's bearing the names of the people, right, by their tribes. He is representing them to the Lord. He has this breastplate over his heart, and it has 12 stones, each one with a name of one of the sons of Israel. And we're told that therefore he bears the judgment of the people over his heart. So again, you think about preview Jesus, and Jesus is this ultimate high priest who goes before God and bears the judgment and remembrance of all the people, and therefore he offers atonement for them. He's the one who offers the ultimate sacrifice in his own death for the people. And you see this even in what the priest is wearing in the book of Exodus. Then you have the Urim and Thummim. These are these 2 stones that will come up later, but we're not exactly sure how they're used, but they're used to communicate with God. He communicates and shows his decisions at times with them. And then you have this turban that the high priest would wear with this plate that says holy to the Lord. So on the priest's forehead, the high priest's forehead, as he goes before and ministers to the Lord, he wears this headpiece that proclaims that he is holy to the Lord. And just to make a forward connection here, in the book of Revelation, sometimes you'll hear about this mark of the beast. People make a big deal of this sometimes. But in the book of Revelation, there's 2 marks on one's forehead. You either have the mark of the beast or you have the mark of the lamb. And the mark of the lamb is really just the sign. It's just saying you are one who believes in Jesus. You're one who follows him. You belong to him. And you can almost think of that message of believing in Jesus, following Jesus, this mark of the Lamb on one's forehead, being like this high priest who goes before the Lord, even though he's sinful, he is atoned for and therefore can wear a headpiece that says holy to the Lord. And so now every Christian, everyone who believes in Jesus, goes before the Lord as one who bears on their head this news, holy to the Lord. And then we get into chapter 29 where you have this consecration of the priest. So they go through this washing, this clothing, this anointing. And again, consecration is this idea of setting something apart for a particular purpose. And so you have these priests who are being set apart for a special purpose. They're not going to live exactly like everybody else, but they're going to live offering sacrifices to the Lord. And again, this is where the New Testament says that every believer is a priest. So you can imagine every Christian is washed from their sins. They are clothed with the righteousness of God, that we now stand holy and blameless, right? Look, we just talked about holy to the Lord, and anointed for the purpose of offering sacrifices. And the New Testament's definition of sacrifices are our lives, our good works, our prayers. Again, not that those aren't what wash us, but those are what we now offer now that we are washed. You see then a sacrifice as a part of the ceremony, the sacrifice of a sin offering. Moses puts blood on their right earlobe, right thumb, and right toe. So this idea that this sin offering covers them from head to toe, basically, and everything they do with their hands then is consecrated as well. So earlobe, thumb, and toe are all put a little blood on there. And now they're instituted these daily sacrifices. So they would offer a sacrifice every morning and every evening. That was just a part of the life. That was just a part of the people of Israel. Every morning, the priests offer a sacrifice for the people. Every evening, they offer a sacrifice. Now, again, I just told you, New Testament definition of sacrifices, right? So we live our lives from the moment we get up to when we go to bed. It's kind of one big sacrifice. And this is also a good reason for, while praying throughout the day is important, morning prayers, evening prayers, something like that, right? This morning sacrifice, this evening sacrifice. Just our whole life, our whole body should be one big sacrifice. But these kind of times, these periods, these rhythms that God has built in, that before you go into your day, you offer a sacrifice to the Lord. As you close out your day, you offer a sacrifice. Pretty interesting, pretty cool. Then in chapter 30, you have the altar of incense. So this is another type of sacrifice or offering they would give, where you have this incense, which has this fragrant smell. He institutes this tax and the census. You have this bronze basin where you would wash utensils. You would, again, wash things, cleanse them for the proper use. And then you have this anointing oil that was specific to these ceremonial purposes. And what's really interesting is that God makes it very clear that this oil is not to be used for any other purpose. And you're not even supposed to make an oil anything like it for any other purpose. But there's something very special about having a designated smell composition that is for this holy sacred purpose, and that it's not to mix with other things. Kind of interesting. And then in chapter 31, we're told that God has already picked this man named Bezalel and another man named Oholiab, and they are endowed with God's spirit to all handiwork and for all good craftsmanship. And what I think is really interesting about this is in the New Testament, we get a fuller picture of the Holy Spirit, but that's throughout the Bible. The Holy Spirit being part of this Trinity, God himself, and yet one who dwells in us. And sometimes when we talk about the Holy Spirit's work, we think about spiritual matters, right? So you think about New Testament will talk about the fruit of the Spirit. So what the Spirit produces in us being things like joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. All really good things, all really important. I really like that this passage highlights that the Spirit also equips us for things like really good sewing and really good carving. And I think that's really interesting when you think about skills. I think we need to do a good job of seeing that all skills and abilities are gifts from God. Somebody who has a gift for music, that is a gift from God. Somebody who has a gift for poetry or technology or math, like those are gifts from God that can be used to his purposes. They can be used in service through work and such, but they can also be used in worship in this case and should contribute to the people of God. Like you think about Bezalel, he's somebody who God has given these gifts of craftsmanship. And then all of a sudden he says, great, I need you to make the place where everyone's going to worship me and the place where my sacrifices are offered. So pretty cool. And you have that kind of gift of the Spirit functioning in that way. We have this command then, above all, you should keep the Sabbaths. So again, this important command that this is going to be an important sign for God's people, Israel, that they're going to honor the Sabbaths. So that means the weekly Sabbath, those every 7-year Sabbaths, those holidays, those festivals, those are really important. And the reasoning that God gives is that you may know that I, the Lord, or Yahweh, sanctify you. So lest you think that you're going to accomplish all this by your work, you need to take a break and honor these, because it's a reminder that I'm the one who has made you holy. I'm the one who's brought you here, right? I'm the one who provides for you. You can take a day off from working because I'm the one who cares for you. And it's better to work those 6 days and then spend a day resting and letting me care for you than it is trying to work 7 days. That is an act that you don't trust that I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to take care of you. So for the people of Israel, this is a huge deal. And then we're told that the 10 Commandments are written on these 2 tablets of stone with the finger of God. So God himself writes these tablets and gives them to Moses. And then as we close out this week's readings, we have one more day and things go sideways. So we're in chapter 32. You might have realized as we've been talking through, we've spent a lot of time on rules in the last little bit, a lot of times on instructions. This is all stuff that Moses is getting told while he's up on the mountain. These rules about the tabernacle, these rules about the priests and what's going to happen. And so what happens is the people get impatient and they basically tell Aaron, dude, Moses is never coming down. Like, do something, make us a god. Aaron tells them to give them their gold jewelry, right? You think of what they got in Egypt, all that gold and jewelry that the Egyptians gave them. And Aaron makes it into a metal calf. And again, this is a clear violation of the 10 Commandments. This is a clear violation of you shall have no other gods before me. Do not make a graven image, right? Don't make an image of anything on heaven or on earth, like no animals. God had explicitly warned them about making golden statues of things earlier. And now here Aaron is making this calf and he says, behold, O Israel, these are the gods that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So he's now saying, hey, this little idol here, this calf, this is what brought you out of Egypt. You should worship it as such. And then the people have the audacity to apparently have a feast to the Lord or a feast to Yahweh. So notice here, they're in such clear violation of his command. They are terribly in the wrong and they are committing idolatry and turning away from him. And yet they're trying to justify it as if it's for him somehow, some way. And then it says that they ate and drank and rose up to play. So they're doing all sorts of shenanigans. They're doing all sorts of wickedness. And then the Lord knows this, right? He's the Lord. So he tells Moses what's happening. And he says, basically, this people is evil. They're wicked. I need to destroy them. Or we talked earlier about God's presence. No evil belongs in this presence. And one of the things that God told the people when they came out of Egypt is, if you obey my voice, I won't send the plagues on you that I sent on Egypt, right? Those were acts of judgment. Just listen to me and you'll be fine. But the just thing to do to sin is for punishment. And so God basically says, I'm going to consume this people. I'm going to blot them out. Moses intercedes and basically says, no, don't do it, Lord. Remember your promises. Remember, the Egyptians are just going to say that the reason that you brought them out here was to destroy them in the wilderness. And so you see God carrying out righteous judgment, but you see somebody interceding and saying, please forgive them even though they don't deserve it. So again, preview of Jesus interceding the rightful punishment for sin and instead taking it upon himself so we might live. But then Moses goes down. He's so mad, he throws the tablets down on the ground and breaks them. He burns up the calf. He grinds it into dust and he makes the people drink it. And then you have this judgment against the people. So you do have forgiveness, right? You have the people being spared, but you do have consequences for this action. So while not everybody will die, there are some who will die. Now, the first thing that Moses says is that if there's anyone for the Lord, come to me. So he's giving people a chance. Turn from your stupor, your craziness that you're going into. Come here if you're with the Lord, and you have the sons of Levi coming, and they are called to carry out a judgment against the people for this sin, this idolatry, which we're already told was punishable by death. And so they go, they carry out some of that, and then God also sends a plague. Now, again, you have over 1 million people. Any loss is sad. Any loss is tragic. But ultimately, God doesn't wipe out the whole people, but instead only carries out judgment on a handful. And then from here, God says in chapter 33, basically, all right, it's time to leave Sinai, time to leave this place. But I can't go with you because this people is so wicked, they're so sinful that by my nature, I'm going to consume them, right? We talked about this. Like, there's no place in God's presence for sin. God's like, this people's going to keep sinning. I shouldn't be with them because my judgment against them would ultimately be their downfall. Now, Moses, we're told, talks about the tent of meeting. So he goes into the tabernacle, goes into God's presence. He speaks to God face to face like a friend would speak. This is really unique to Moses. You're not going to have anyone else have this kind of relationship with God. So again, this is Moses being a really key and important figure. And then you have these new tablets and Moses interceding and saying, please come with us. What makes us different than any other people other than the fact that you're amongst us, right? Moses realizes that the Israelites are not special because they're a particularly moral people, because they're a particularly intelligent people. The people of Israel are different because they have God with them, right? And that's an invitation for all people, but what's unique about Israel is that God is with them. That's what makes them distinct. And so Moses says, we can't go on without you. You need to be amongst us. Otherwise, we're just any old people. And I think it's a good reminder as Christians, what makes a Christian distinct from anybody else in this world? It's only that they have Jesus. It's not that they're a better person. It's not that they're a smarter person. It's not that they're inherently a more moral person. God willing, following Jesus leads us to live a more moral and ethical life. God willing, following Jesus leads us to gain wisdom that we can bless others with in this world. But we hold no superiority other than Jesus is with us. And even then, that's an invitation for all that we desire other people to be brought into, that other people might have that as well. So you have new tablets created with the 10 commandments, and then you have the covenant renewed. And I'll just highlight in chapter 34, verses 6 and 7. This is an important refrain that you're going to see repeated over and over in the Old Testament. But the Lord passes before Moses, and I'm going to say his personal name here. And the Lord says, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So this refrain here, this is God revealing who he is character-wise. And we're seeing this play out already because the people at this point, they deserve to die. Yahweh is forgiving them and he's remaining amongst them. And so he's saying, who am I? I am this one who is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. That's his defining features. And he will keep steadfast love for thousands of generations. And yes, he will punish the guilty for the third and fourth generation, right? So there's this idea of sin having consequences, even ripple effects to surrounding family. But compare third and fourth generation to thousands of generations, right? It's not comparable. Steadfast love and mercy way trumps even this idea of justice. So God is fully just, but even more so, he is merciful and steadfast in his love and faithfulness towards his people. And then we're told that Moses would go visit God and attend a meeting. He would speak to him when he came out. His face would be shining from this experience, from talking to God. And then he started to wear this veil. So when he'd go into the tent, he would lift up the veil, talk to God. And then when he came out, he would pull down the veil and cover his face. And so you see just God's radiant relationship with Moses, that even in talking to Moses, Moses' face just shines. And so that's where we're left off at the end of chapter 34. At the end of this, we only have one more day of reading in the book of Exodus, and then we get into Leviticus, and we get into some more laws and some more interesting commands that God gives his people to live out. But before we close out, I want to get to just one question that had been brought up. Just a reminder that if you have any questions about anything in the scripture readings or anything about the Bible, anything about any of these stories, you can submit those at podcast@renewaldenver.org. You just want to send an email, or if you go to renewaldenver.org/Bible in a year, there's a Google form there. You can submit questions that way as well. One question that I wanted to address was, why was Simeon the one that was bound up in Genesis 42? So if you remember back when Joseph was in Egypt and he rises up to like Pharaoh's second-hand man and his brothers come and they don't know it's Joseph, there's a point where Joseph basically says he's going to keep one of them until they go back and bring Benjamin to Egypt so he can see Benjamin to verify their story. He accuses them, he's kind of messing with them. He accuses them of being spies and says, you said you had this other brother, then you have to go get him and show him to me. But he's going to keep one kind of like collateral in prison until they can do so. And he takes Simeon, which might feel pretty random. And I think that the reason for this, well, not explicitly told to us, is you would probably likely want to take the firstborn, the eldest, which would be in this case Reuben. But in this moment, just right before that passage, you have Reuben and the brothers talking, and they're talking in Hebrew. They don't think Joseph can understand them, so they think that they can kind of just have a side conversation. And Reuben says, "This is why I told you not to sell the boy," right? So if you remember, Reuben was actually seeking to save Joseph from being killed or sold off. And it was while he was gone that they ultimately sold him. And so Reuben is now telling his brothers, this is why I tried to save him. And so Joseph hears that Reuben kind of had his back. My best guess would be that Joseph spared Reuben because of that and took the next eldest, would be Simeon. Now, again, this is not a great story for Jacob because they go back and they basically tell Jacob, hey, your son Simeon is in prison. And the only way to get him out is if we can show this man that Benjamin is real. We need to take Benjamin with us. And Jacob basically says no, because he can't fathom losing Benjamin. So again, he's lost a son, Joseph. He's lost another son, Simeon, but he can get that son back if he'll just let Benjamin go. But he's so fearful he's going to lose Benjamin forever that he's willing to basically just forsake Simeon. So not a great story for Jacob. And it isn't until they're basically starving again and need to go back for more food, they realize that we're never going to get more food unless we actually bring Benjamin back. So Simeon was probably in jail for probably a number of months, if not years, before they came back. But that would be my best guess as to why Simeon was the one who was imprisoned, because Joseph heard that Reuben had vouched for him and took the next eldest. Well, that's all the time I have for you today. I hope that you have a blessed reading. And as always, I pray that the word of Jesus would renew you day by day until life everlasting. Have a blessed week.